social media sensation turned professional boxer Jake Paul recently offered an extensive technical breakdown of how a potential future showdown between unified heavyweight champion Oleksandr Usyk and former WBO title holder Joseph Parker might unfold during a lengthy segment on his podcast with the analytical perspective of someone who has immersed himself deeply in boxing training and strategy over the past several years. Paul provided a remarkably detailed examination of the stylistic dynamics that would come into play between these two elite heavyweights. He began by acknowledging Parker's impressive career resurgence, noting how the New Zealander has evolved from being a technically sound but somewhat cautious boxer into a more aggressive, physically imposing version under trainer Andy Lee's guidance. Paul pointed specifically to Parker's improved punch selection, increased willingness to exchange in the pocket, and noticeably enhanced power in both hands, as evidenced by his recent knockout streak. However, despite being clearly impressed by Parker's development, Paul was quick to emphasize that Usyk represents an entirely different level of challenge due to his unparalleled combination of footwork, ring IQ, and punch accuracy that has allowed him to dominate much larger opponents like Anthony Joshua on multiple occasions. Expanding on his technical analysis of how the fight might develop, Paul spent considerable time breaking down Usyk's unique fighting style that blends traditional amateur boxing fundamentals with unorthodox angles and rhythmic changes. He highlighted how Usyk's ability to fight effectively while moving both forward and backward gives him offensive and defensive versatility that few heavyweights in history have possessed. Paul specifically pointed to Usyk's mastery of distance control through his piston-like jab and how he uses subtle upper body movements to make opponents miss by inches before countering with sharp combinations, while giving Parker full credit for his fundamentally sound technique and underrated hand speed. Paul questioned whether even this improved version of Parker could solve the complex puzzle that Usyk presents, particularly given the Ukrainian's ability to adapt mid-fight, as he demonstrated in the second Joshua bout, where he made significant adjustments to dominate even more conclusively. Paul dedicated an entire segment of his analysis to examining potential pathways to victory for Parker, identifying several key factors that could make the fight more competitive than casual observers might expect. He emphasized Parker's granite chin and proven durability against concussive punchers like Joe Joyce and Dillian White, suggesting this resilience might allow him to withstand Usyk's accumulation of punches over 12 rounds better than previous opponents. Additionally, Paul pointed to Parker's recent development of a vicious body attack as a potentially crucial weapon, referencing specific moments in Usyk's fights with Derek Chisora and Anthony Joshua, where well-placed body shots appeared to momentarily affect the champion's mobility. However, Paul cautioned that consistently landing to the body against Usyk presents extraordinary difficulties due to the Ukrainian's elite upper body movement, defensive clinching when pressured, and ability to quickly pivot out of danger, all skills that have frustrated opponents attempting to slow him down with body work. The conversation took an interesting turn as Paul compared Parker's recent performances against second-tier opposition to the monumental step-up in class that Usyk would represent, while acknowledging that Parker has looked sensational in dispatching faded veterans and fringe contenders during his current winning streak. Paul stressed there exists an enormous gulf between dominating that level of competition and solving the complex problems posed by an active, pound-for-pound great like Usyk. Paul suggested Parker would need to demonstrate even more dimensions to his game than he's shown recently to truly threaten Usyk, particularly in terms of cutting off the ring with intelligent footwork rather than merely following his opponent and maintaining disciplined pressure without falling into the counter-punching traps that Usyk sets so masterfully, delving into the psychological warfare that would inevitably be part of this potential matchup. Paul provided fascinating insight into how Usyk's style systematically breaks down opponents mentally as much as physically. He described in detail how Usyk's ability to make world-class fighters miss by narrow margins while simultaneously landing flashy counters creates mounting frustration that often leads to abandoned game plans, as witnessed in both Joshua fights. For Parker to succeed where others have failed, Paul emphasized the absolute necessity of maintaining emotional composure through what would likely be several rounds of Usyk building an early lead on the scorecards through his superior activity and cleaner punching. Paul suggested Parker would need to embrace his underdog status fully and focus on gradual breakdown rather than looking for one dramatic knockout punch. Though, he did acknowledge that Parker possesses legitimate one-punch power that could theoretically change everything if he lands cleanly on Usyk's chin. Paul also offered an intriguing analysis of how the current heavyweight landscape affects the significance and timing of this potential matchup with Tyson Fury, seemingly tied up in various obligations, and Anthony Joshua still rebuilding his career following back-to-back losses to Usyk. Paul positioned Parker as perhaps the most credible available contender for Usyk outside of those marquee names. He made a compelling case that while casual fans might prefer seeing Usyk against bigger stars from a commercial perspective, a fight with Parker represents a legitimate championship-level challenge that would test Usyk against a technically sound, durable opponent with absolutely nothing to lose. Paul even floated the interesting notion that an impressive performance against Parker could actually enhance Usyk's standing in the sport if he were to dominate in spectacular fashion, as it would demonstrate his continued superiority over quality opposition while waiting for the Fury fight to materialize. The discussion turned particularly insightful as Paul speculated about how Parker's training team might approach preparing for such a unique challenge as Usyk presents. He envisioned a camp that would need to incorporate highly specific types of sparring partners capable of mimicking Usyk's unconventional movement patterns, while also preparing for the